The sky above Earth darkened as enormous alien ships appeared, covering the stars. The Xeric Empire had arrived. Their fleet stretched across the atmosphere, a terrifying sight for any species. The Xeric were powerful conquerors, known for invading planets and forcing weaker races to surrender. No one had ever stopped them. Commander Veckrol stood inside his warship, watching Earth from the large viewing screen. His red eyes narrowed as he studied the planet. "Another weak world," he muttered. "This will be easy." Beside him stood his most trusted officer, Kren, who nodded in agreement. "The humans are not advanced like us, Commander. They use primitive weapons. Their army is small. They cannot resist the Xeric Empire." Veckrol smirked. "Then let us begin. Send the war beasts. Let them see what true power looks like." Kren pressed a button on the control panel. Below the ships, massive transport pods dropped from the sky. Inside each pod was a Vorgeth, a terrifying beast that the Xeric used for war. Vorgeths were huge creatures, taller than a human house, with thick black scales, glowing yellow eyes, and razor-sharp fangs. Their claws could tear through metal, and their venom was strong enough to paralyze enemies in seconds. As the pods crashed onto Earth's surface, the doors burst open, and the Vorgeths stepped out, growling. Their deep roars echoed through the land, shaking the ground beneath them. Earth's military forces watched in fear as the creatures appeared. Soldiers aimed their weapons, ready to fight, but deep inside, they knew the truth. They had never faced anything like this before. Veckrol chuckled as he watched the screen. The humans will run in terror, just like all the others. Meanwhile, on Earth, far from the battlefield, Mark walked through the dense forest, enjoying the quiet morning. He was an exobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. He had always been curious about other planets, but right now, he was happy just exploring Earth. His backpack was full of samples, plants, soil, and some strange rocks he had found. He adjusted his glasses and checked his map. He had no idea that an alien invasion was happening. As he walked, he heard a loud crash nearby. The ground shook slightly. Mark stopped, confused. "An earthquake," he mumbled. Then he heard heavy footsteps. The trees rustled, and something big moved behind them. Mark's heart started beating faster. Slowly, he stepped forward, pushing the branches aside. And then he saw it. A massive creature stood in front of him. It was at least twice his height, covered in thick black scales. Its glowing yellow eyes stared at him, and its sharp fangs gleamed in the sunlight. Mark froze. His brain told him to run, but his curiosity made him stay. His eyes widened as he whispered, "Whoa, what is this thing?" The creature growled, lowering its head. Its tail swayed behind it, knocking over a tree. Saliva dripped from its mouth, and its claws dug into the dirt. It looked ready to attack. Most people would have screamed or fainted. Mark did neither. Instead, he tilted his head and smiled. "Aw," he said softly. "You're just a big puppy, aren't you?" The Vorgeth stopped. It blinked. The deep growl in its throat turned into a confused rumble. Mark crouched slightly and reached into his backpack. "You must be hungry, huh?" He pulled out a protein bar and unwrapped it. "Here, buddy. Want some?" He held the bar out. The Vorgeth sniffed the air. Its sharp fangs were only inches from Mark's fingers. The alien war beast, trained to destroy cities, opened its massive jaws and gently took the protein bar. On the Xeric warship, Veckrol and his officers watched in horror. The screen showed their deadliest war beast calmly eating from a human's hand. Instead of attacking, the Vorgeth's ears twitched. Its tail, which was supposed to be a weapon, wagged slightly. Commander Veckrol's eyes widened. What is happening?" Kren shook his head, his voice full of disbelief. "Commander, the Vorgeth is not attacking." Veckrol slammed his fist against the table. "Impossible. Vorgeths destroy everything. They fear nothing." But there on the screen, the terrifying war beast was licking the human's hand. The human was laughing. Commander Veckrol stood frozen in disbelief. His sharp claws gripped the armrest of his command chair as he watched the screen. The mighty Vorgath, the deadliest war beast of the Xeric Empire, was supposed to tear through the human forces and bring terror to Earth. Instead, it was wagging its tail and licking the human's face. Veckrol growled, his deep voice shaking with anger. What is this madness? His second-in-command, Kren, could only shake his head. Commander, it is impossible. No creature has ever tamed a Vorgath before. The screen showed the human named Mark crouching beside the huge beast, scratching behind its ears. The Vorgath let out a low, pleased rumble, almost like a cat purring. It had completely forgotten that it was supposed to destroy this planet. Mark, unaware of the chaos he was causing in the Xeric command center, laughed as the massive alien creature licked his cheek. Whoa, easy there, big guy. Your tongue is like sandpaper. The Vorgath sat down, its huge tail thumping against the ground. Dust and leaves flew up, but Mark only grinned. You're just a big puppy, huh? He reached into his backpack again and pulled out another protein bar. The Xeric officers watched in horror as the war beast gently nibbled at the snack like a well-trained pet. The Xeric army in confusion. Inside the warship, the Xeric soldiers whispered among themselves. How is this possible? One of them muttered. A Vorgath has never refused an order before, another said. Veckrol's eyes burned with fury. Enough. It is only one beast. Release the second one. It will do what the first could not. Kren hesitated. Commander, if this human can control one Vorgath, what if he? Do it, Veckrol roared. Kren sighed and pressed a button on the control panel. Down on Earth, another massive metal pod crashed into the ground. The hatch hissed open, and a second Vorgath stepped out. It was even bigger than the first, its yellow eyes glowing fiercely. This one had been specially trained for war. It would not fail. It let out a bone-shaking roar and locked onto its target. Mark. Mark and his pets. Mark turned as he heard the loud crashing sound. He saw the second Vorgath stepping out of the pod, its claws tearing into the dirt. It roared again, and for a moment, Mark felt a chill. The first Vorgath, which Mark had named Buddy, suddenly stood in front of him. Its ears flattened, and it let out a low growl. Mark blinked. Wait, are you protecting me? The second Vorgath charged. Its huge paws thundered against the ground as it ran toward them. Mark raised his hands. Whoa, whoa, let's all calm down. Buddy snapped its jaws, stepping in front of Mark and letting out a warning growl. The second Vorgath stopped. Its yellow eyes flicked between Buddy and the small human standing beside it. Mark slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out another protein bar. He unwrapped it and held it up. Here, big guy, you hungry too? For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, the second Vorgath sniffed the air. Its giant claws, sharp enough to cut through steel, relaxed slightly. Its ears twitched. Then, to the complete shock of the Xeric army, it walked up to Mark and gently took the protein bar from his hand. Buddy wagged its tail. The second Vorgath let out a low huff and sat down next to Mark. Mark laughed. Well, I guess I have two alien dogs now. Commander Veckrol's rage. Back on the Xeric warship, panic filled the command room. The officers stared at the screen in disbelief. Kren wiped his face. Commander, the second Vorgath, it also. Veckrol's claws scraped against the metal table. His teeth clenched. I refuse to accept this. Kren turned to his commander, his voice uneasy. Sir, what if humans have some special ability? What if they can control all Vorgaths? Silence fell in the room. Veckrol's red eyes burned with fury. Then we must act before it is too late. He pointed at the screen. If the beasts will not attack, we will destroy the human ourselves. The real battle begins. Down on Earth, Mark was still completely unaware of what was happening above him. He looked at his two new pets and grinned. "All right, buddy, and I'll call you Max. How about we find some more food?" But before he could take another step, a loud explosion echoed across the sky. He looked up and saw several Xeric warships descending toward him. Buddy and Max stood protectively in front of him, their ears alert. Mark frowned. "Huh, I think I made someone mad." The Xeric army was coming. And this time, they were not relying on the Vorgeths. Mark stood in the middle of the forest, staring at the giant alien warships descending toward him. The sky, once clear and blue, was now filled with dark metallic ships. Their engines roared like thunder, and their weapons glowed with a dangerous red light. Beside him, Buddy and Max, the two massive Vorgeths, stood alert. Their ears twitched, their tails stiffened, and deep growls rumbled from their throats. Mark sighed and crossed his arms. "Well, I think they noticed us." A bright light flashed from the largest warship, and a hologram of Commander Vekrol appeared in the sky. His red eyes burned with fury as he glared at Mark. "Human." Vekrol's voice boomed across the land. "You have interfered with the Xeric Empire's conquest. Our war beasts have never refused an order, until now. What have you done to them?" Mark blinked and looked at Buddy and Max, who were still growling at the floating image of Vekrol. He shrugged. I gave them snacks." The Xeric soldiers, standing inside the warship, looked at each other in confusion. "Snacks?" Vekrol slammed his fist against the control panel. "Enough of this nonsense. You will surrender immediately." Mark scratched his head. Let me think about that." He paused, then smiled. "No." Vekrol's sharp teeth clenched. "You dare defy the Xeric Empire. You are a simple, primitive creature. What makes you think you can resist us?" Mark patted Buddy's large head. The Vorgeth let out a deep rumbling sound, almost like a laugh. Then Mark pointed up at the sky. "Well," he said, grinning, "I have two big, scary alien dogs who seem to like me. And from what I can tell, they don't like you." Buddy and Max snarled, their fangs flashing. Vekrol's anger grew. He turned to his soldiers. "Prepare the attack. Capture the human. Destroy the Vorgeths if necessary." The Xeric soldiers land. With a loud whoosh, several small Xeric landing ships shot down from the main warship, crashing into the forest. The trees shook violently as the alien soldiers emerged. They were tall, covered in dark armor, and carried powerful plasma weapons that hummed with energy. Their leader, Captain Zur, raised his weapon and pointed at Mark. "Capture him. If the beasts attack, eliminate them." Buddy and Max immediately stepped forward, their bodies blocking Mark. Their deep growls filled the air, and their glowing yellow eyes locked onto the approaching soldiers. Mark took a step back. "You guys got this, right?" The first Xeric soldier fired his plasma rifle. Buddy lunged forward with incredible speed, dodging the attack. Before the soldier could react, Buddy swiped his massive paw, knocking the weapon away. The rifle flew through the air and landed several feet away. Max charged toward another group of soldiers. They fired their weapons, but Max jumped into the air, landing right in the middle of them. With one powerful tail swipe, he sent the soldiers flying into the bushes. Mark whistled. "Wow. Good job, guys." The remaining Xeric soldiers hesitated. They had trained with Vorgeths before, but these two were different. Instead of obeying orders, they were protecting a human. Captain Zur gritted his teeth. "Do not hesitate. We are warriors of the Xeric Empire. Attack." The soldiers charged. Plasma shots lit up the forest, cutting through trees and setting branches on fire. Mark ducked behind a fallen log. "Okay, this is getting a little intense." Buddy and Max moved like lightning. Despite their huge size, they were fast, strong, and smart. They dodged attacks, knocked weapons away, and roared so loudly that the Xeric soldiers trembled. One soldier aimed his plasma rifle at Mark. Before he could fire, Max leaped forward and grabbed the weapon in his massive jaws. With a single crunch, he snapped it in half like a twig. The soldier stumbled back in terror. Mark peeked over the log and smirked. Yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Vekrol's final move. Inside the Zyrek warship, Vekrol watched the battle in shock. His best-trained soldiers were losing, not to an army, but to one human and two disobedient Vorgeths. His claws scraped the control panel. His voice was low and dangerous. If my soldiers cannot handle this, then I will. Kren's eyes widened. Commander, you mean? Vekrol turned. Prepare my battle armor. I will deal with this human myself. The Zyrek soldiers on the battlefield suddenly stopped fighting as a massive dark shadow passed over them. Mark looked up. A larger drop pod was descending from the warship, glowing red as it entered the atmosphere. Buddy and Max stiffened, their ears twitching. They could sense something powerful inside that pod. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead. Something tells me that's the boss fight. With a loud crash, the pod landed. The doors slid open, and Commander Vekrol stepped out. The forest was silent, except for the crackling energy of Commander Vekrol's glowing blue blade. The air smelled of burned wood from the Zyrek soldiers' failed attacks, and the ground was scared with plasma burns. Mark stood behind Buddy and Max, his two massive Vorgeth companions, as they growled at the approaching Zyrek commander. Their golden eyes locked onto the enemy, muscles tense, ready for battle. Vekrol stepped forward, his heavy battle armor making the ground tremble. His red eyes burned with cold fury. You, human, he said in a deep, commanding voice. You are not a warrior. You are not a soldier. And yet, you have made a fool of the Zyrek Empire. Mark sighed and crossed his arms. Yeah, I tend to have that effect on people. Vekrol's grip tightened on his weapon. His sharp claws scraped against the metal handle, and the blue energy blade hummed dangerously. I will not waste time talking, he growled. Surrender now, or I will destroy you. Buddy and Max stepped forward, blocking Mark. Their tails whipped the air, and their deep growls sent a warning. They would not let Vekrol lay a finger on their human. Mark smiled and patted Buddy's head. Yeah, that's not happening, Buddy. Vekrol narrowed his eyes. So be it. Then he attacked. The battle begins. With blinding speed, Vekrol rushed forward, his energy blades slicing through the air. Buddy reacted first. The massive Vorgeth lunged, jaws wide, aiming to bite the enemy commander. But Vekrol was fast. At the last second, he dodged sideways, then spun his blade. The energy weapon slashed through the air, leaving a blue trail of light. Buddy jumped back just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike. Max charged next, his giant paws shaking the ground as he leaped at Vekrol. The Zyrek commander ducked under Max's massive frame and rolled forward, landing just a few feet from Mark. His glowing red eyes locked onto the human. You're mine. But before he could strike, Buddy swiped his tail, slamming into Vekrol's armor. Bam! The commander was sent flying backward, crashing into a tree with a loud thud. Leaves and dust filled the air, and the Zyrek soldiers watching the battle gasped in shock. Vekrol groaned, pushing himself back up. His armor had taken the hit, but he was still standing. His red eyes burned even brighter. You beasts dare challenge me, he growled. Buddy and Max growled back, their claws digging into the dirt. Mark grinned. Yeah, I don't think they like you very much. Vekrol's rage. Vekrol's patience snapped. He roared, the sound shaking the trees. His armor glowed, and energy surged around his body, making the air buzz with power. Then he charged again, but this time he was even faster. Max lunged, but Vekrol dodged and landed a direct hit with his energy blade. A powerful shockwave exploded, knocking Max off his feet and sending him skidding across the ground. Buddy rushed in, jaws open to bite, But Vekrol spun around and slammed his armored fist into Buddy's side. The impact sent Buddy crashing into a fallen tree. Mark's eyes widened. Hey, not cool. Vekrol turned toward him, breathing heavily. Your beasts are strong, he admitted, but I am a Xyrek warlord. I do not lose. Mark gulped. He was fast, but he wasn't a fighter. He had been relying on Buddy and Max to protect him. Now both of them were struggling to get back up, and Vekrol was coming straight for him. Mark took a step back. Love guys. Buddy and Max tried to stand, but they were dazed from the attacks. Vekrol raised his energy blade. Blue lightning crackled across the weapon. This ends now. Mark's heart pounded. He had to think fast. The clever human. Mark's mind raced. Vekrol was stronger, faster, and trained for war. But Mark had something else. Brains. His eyes darted to the fallen Xyrek soldiers nearby. Their plasma rifles were still lying on the ground. An idea formed. Mark suddenly grinned. Hey, Vekrol, he said, stepping to the side. You ever heard of fetch? Vekrol frowned. What? Before he could react, Mark grabbed one of the fallen rifles and tossed it into the air. Buddy and Max, still dizzy from the fight, saw the movement, and instinct took over. They immediately leaped toward the flying weapon, just like a dog chasing a thrown ball. Their massive bodies collided midair, right above Vekrol. Before he could escape, both Vorgoths came crashing down on top of him. Boom! The ground shook violently, and a huge dust cloud exploded into the air. For several seconds, there was silence. Then, Buddy and Max stood up, shaking the dust from their fur. And underneath them, completely pinned to the ground, was Commander Vekrol. His armor was crushed, his energy blade short-circuited, and his red eyes were wide with disbelief. Mark walked over and crouched beside him. So, what did we learn today? Vekrol gritted his teeth but said nothing. Mark patted Buddy's head. Good job, guys. You just beat the big bad boss. The remaining Xyrek soldiers, seeing their leader defeated, panicked. They quickly activated their emergency recall beacons, and one by one, they vanished in bright flashes of light, retreating to their warship. Vekrol snarled. You will regret this, human. Mark shrugged. I doubt it. The Xyrek warship above Earth suddenly turned and flew away, disappearing into space. Mark watched it go, then looked at Buddy and Max. Well, that was fun. Who's up for some snacks? Buddy wagged his tail. Max let out a happy grunt. And together, the three unlikely heroes walked away, leaving behind an empty battlefield and a defeated warlord. Mark stretched his arms and yawned as he leaned against a fallen tree. The battle was over. The Xyrek warship had retreated, and the defeated Commander Vekrol had been forced to teleport away with his soldiers. Beside him, Buddy and Max rested, their large bodies sprawled across the ground. Their tails flicked lazily, and their ears twitched as they enjoyed the peaceful silence. Mark took a deep breath. Well, that was easy. Buddy opened one eye and gave him a look. Mark laughed. Okay, maybe not easy, but we won. Max let out a deep grunt of approval. For a moment, everything felt calm. The forest was quiet, the sun was shining, and Mark felt like he could finally relax. But then, a loud beep came from his wrist. Mark frowned and looked at his wrist communicator, a small device he had borrowed from a Xyrek soldier during the fight. The screen was flashing with a warning message. Incoming transmission from Xyrek High Command. Mark raised an eyebrow. Oh, that can't be good. He tapped the screen, and a holographic image appeared. A towering Xyrek general, his armor even more menacing than Vekrol's. His glowing red eyes burned with cold fury. My name is General Xailor, Supreme Leader of the Xyrek Army, the alien growled. His deep voice sent a chill through the air. Mark blinked. Nice to meet you. Can I help you with something? Xailor's eyes narrowed. Silence, human. You have humiliated my forces, defeated my warlord, and disrupted the will of the Xyric Empire. Mark sighed. Yeah, I do that sometimes. Zeller's voice darkened. We do not tolerate failure, and we do not tolerate weakness. He turned slightly, gesturing to someone off-screen. A new image appeared next to him. Commander Veckrel, still bruised from his fight, kneeling in front of Sailor. His armor was damaged, his face filled with shame. Mark tilted his head. Oh wow, Veckrel, buddy, you don't look so good. Zeller's eyes burned brighter. Commander Veckrel has failed me. And in the Xyric Empire, failure is punished. Without another word, Zaylor raised his hand. A bright red energy beam shot out, and Veckrel screamed before vanishing in a flash of light. Mark's jaw dropped. Okay, that was unexpected. Buddy and Max growled at the hologram, their fur bristling. Zaylor turned his gaze back to Mark. You think you have won, human, but this is only the beginning. The Xyric Empire does not lose. I am coming for you. The transmission cut off, leaving only a silent, blinking screen. Mark stared at it for a moment. Then he sighed. Well, that's not great. A dangerous plan. Mark stood up and dusted off his pants. Okay, guys. We need a plan. Buddy and Max sat up, their ears twitching. Mark paced back and forth, thinking. Zeller is coming. He's got a bigger army, stronger weapons, and way more ships. If we stay here, we're gonna have a really bad time. Max let out a low growl, agreeing. Mark tapped his chin. So, what do we do? Run? He shook his head. No, that won't work. Hide? Nope, they'll find us. Buddy tilted his head. Then Mark snapped his fingers. Wait, what if instead of running, we go after them first? Buddy and Max looked at each other. Mark grinned. Think about it. The Xyric army is preparing for a massive attack, right? But right now, they don't expect us to attack them. He pointed up at the sky. If we sneak onto one of their ships, we can sabotage their systems, mess with their weapons, and maybe even take out Sailor before he gets here. Max let out a deep puff, as if considering the idea. Buddy, on the other hand, wagged his tail slightly. He liked the sound of an attack first. Mark smirked. Yeah, I knew you'd like that. Breaking into a Xyric warship, Mark pulled out the stolen Xyric communicator and tapped a few buttons. The screen flickered, showing a map of a nearby Xyric outpost. There, he said, pointing. This is a small supply station just outside the city. It's where they store weapons, fuel, and most importantly, transport ships. He looked at Buddy and Max. If we can sneak in, steal a ship, and fly straight to their command center, we might have a shot at stopping Sailor before he gets here. Max let out a deep rumble. It was a dangerous plan. Buddy, however, wagged his tail again. He was excited. Mark grinned. That's the spirit. He turned back to the communicator and pressed a few more buttons. All right, let's do this. The screen blinked. New mission activated. Infiltrate Xyric supply base. Mark cracked his knuckles. Time to take the fight to them. Buddy and Max stood up, ready for action. The fight wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Mark crouched behind a large rock, peering through the trees at the Xyric supply base ahead. The metal fortress stood tall, its dark surface glowing with blue energy lines. Small patrol drones hovered around, scanning the area. Tall Xyric soldiers in armor marched back and forth, guarding the entrance. Mark let out a slow breath. Okay, this is going to be tricky. Buddy and Max lay low beside him, their large bodies hidden in the tall grass. Max's golden eyes were locked on the guards, his ears flicking as he listened to their movements. Buddy's tail twitched excitedly, as if he was ready to pounce. Mark pulled out the stolen Xyric communicator and tapped on the screen. A small holographic map appeared, showing the layout of the base. There, he whispered, pointing at a dock on the side of the base. "That's where they keep the transport ships. If we can get inside, steal one, and take off before they notice, we'll be flying straight to Xalar's command ship." Buddy wagged his tail slightly. Max huffed, signaling that he understood the plan. Mark grinned. "All right, let's do this. Quietly." Silent infiltration. Mark moved carefully through the shadows, keeping low as he approached the fence. The base's security systems were advanced, but not perfect. He spotted a small gap near the side where the metal wall met the rocky ground. "Bingo," he muttered. Max used his massive paws to dig slightly, making the gap just wide enough for them to squeeze through. One by one, they slipped inside. Now inside the base, Mark pressed himself against a metal crate, glancing at the patrolling guards. "All right, no sudden moves," he whispered. Buddy's tail thumped against the ground. Mark gently grabbed it to stop the noise. "Dude, stealth mission. Focus." Buddy blinked, then nodded. Max let out a slow breath, watching the guards carefully. Mark waited until one of the Xyric patrols walked past, then motioned for the others to follow. They moved quickly, weaving between cargo boxes and parked transport vehicles. Ahead, the transport ship dock was in sight. A sleek black shuttle sat on the platform, its engines humming softly. "There's our ride," Mark whispered. "An unexpected problem." Just as they got close, the alarm suddenly blared. "BEP, BEP, BEP." Mark froze. "Oh, that's not good." A loud robotic voice echoed through the base. "Intruder detected. Intruder detected." Xeric guards rushed out, weapons glowing with blue energy. Mark spun around. What gave us away? Then he saw it. Buddy's tail was wagging too fast, and he had accidentally knocked over a metal barrel, which was now rolling loudly across the floor. Mark facepalmed. "Really, Buddy?" Buddy let out a small whimper. Max growled and took a defensive stance. Mark sighed. "All right. So much for stealth. The great escape." The Xyric guards charged forward, their weapons aiming at Mark and his companions. "Seize them," one guard shouted. Mark jumped onto the platform and rushed toward the transport ship. "Buddy. Max. Cover me." Buddy and Max sprang into action, barreling into the guards like unstoppable forces. Buddy leaped at one, knocking him flat on his back. Max swiped with his massive paw, sending another flying into a cargo crate. Mark climbed into the pilot's seat of the transport shuttle. The controls were different from human ships, but he had seen Xeric soldiers operate them before. "All right, let's see if I can fly this thing." He pressed a few buttons. The engine roared to life, sending a shockwave through the air. Buddy and Max jumped aboard, just as more guards arrived, firing their plasma weapons. ZAP. ZAP. Bolts of blue energy hit the side of the ship, leaving scorch marks. Mark grabbed the controls. "Hold on." With a loud whoosh, the ship blasted off, soaring into the sky. The force pushed them back as they shot away from the base. Down below, Xyric soldiers shouted and fired their weapons, but it was too late. They were gone, heading toward danger. As they flew into space, Mark took a deep breath. "Okay, that was close." Buddy wagged his tail, looking proud of himself. Max just let out a long sigh. Mark glanced at the ship's controls. A holographic display showed their destination, the Xyric command fleet, where General Seller was waiting. Mark clenched his fists. "All right, time for Phase 2. They had the ship. Now they were heading straight into the heart of enemy territory. And this time, they weren't running. They were bringing the fight to Xelor. Mark sat in the pilot's seat, gripping the controls of the stolen Xyric transport ship. The dark void of space stretched before him, filled with distant stars and glowing nebula. But his focus was on the massive Xyric command fleet floating ahead, a collection of warships, each one bigger than a city. Buddy and Max sat beside him, their eyes locked on the enemy ships. Mark took a deep breath. All right, guys. This is it. We're flying straight into the belly of the beast. Max let out a low growl. Buddy's tail thumped against the metal floor, but this time, Mark didn't stop him. The ship's communication system beeped, and a Zyrek voice came through the speakers. Transport Shuttle 49A, identify yourself. Mark quickly tapped a few buttons, activating the ship's automatic reply system. A pre-recorded message from a Zyrek soldier. This is Transport Shuttle 49A requesting landing clearance. There was a long pause. Mark held his breath. If the Zyrek security team suspected anything, their plan would fail before it even started. Then the voice responded. Clearance granted. Proceed to Docking Bay 7. Mark smirked. Too easy. He guided the ship forward, approaching the largest warship in the fleet, the Zyrek command vessel, Dreadfang. This was General Xaler's personal ship. This was where the final battle would begin. Landing on the enemy ship, the transport ship glided into Docking Bay 7, passing through a blue energy barrier that kept the vacuum of space out. The inside of the docking bay was huge, filled with other Zyrek ships, cargo crates, and dozens of armored soldiers walking around. Mark felt a small chill run down his spine. They were completely surrounded by the enemy. As the ship touched down, he took a deep breath. All right, we need to move fast. Buddy and Max stood up. Ready. Mark pressed a button, and the ship's ramp lowered with a soft hiss. They stepped out into the metallic docking bay, keeping their heads low as they moved toward the nearest maintenance corridor. Zyrek workers and guards barely glanced at them. To them, Mark was just another soldier transporting cargo. But they couldn't stay unnoticed forever. They needed to find General Xaler's control room, and they needed to do it fast. The mission begins. Mark checked the stolen communicator and pulled up a map of the ship. All right, the command center is on the upper deck. If we take this service elevator here, we should get close. They moved carefully, slipping through the corridors without drawing attention. The warship was massive, filled with high-tech machinery, glowing control panels, and the distant hum of energy generators. But as they turned a corner, they suddenly froze. A squad of Zyrek soldiers stood in their path. One of them narrowed his glowing red eyes. Halt! You! Buddy jumped forward before the soldier could finish. Wham! The Zyrek crashed to the ground before he even knew what hit him. The other guards reached for their weapons, but Max charged forward, knocking them aside like toys. Mark sprinted past the fallen soldiers, pressing the button for the service elevator. Come on, come on. The doors slid open, and they all rushed inside. As the doors closed behind them, alarms suddenly blared through the ship. Intruders detected. Lockdown initiated. Mark groaned. Well, that didn't last long. The elevator shot upward, heading for the command center. They were almost there, face to face with the enemy. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal a massive control room. Giant screens displayed holographic maps of the galaxy, and rows of Zyrek officers worked at glowing control panels. At the center of it all stood General Xaler. His tall, armored figure loomed over the room, his red eyes burning with cold fury. Xaler turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Mark. Well, well, he said in a deep voice. The human finally arrives. Mark took a step forward, cracking his knuckles. Yeah, I figured I'd drop by. You know, say hello, wreck your ship, all the usual stuff. Xaler smirked. You are brave, human, but foolish. He lifted his clawed hand, and suddenly, the room filled with Zyrek soldiers, surrounding Mark, Buddy, and Max. Mark let out a breath. Okay, this might be a problem. Max let out a deep growl, standing his ground. Buddy's tail flicked as he prepared to fight. Xaler crossed his arms. You cannot win. Surrender, and perhaps I will be merciful. Mark grinned. Yeah, that's not really my style. With a sudden movement, he pulled a small device from his pocket. a Zyric EMP grenade he had stolen earlier. Zeller's eyes widened in realization. Mark threw the grenade onto the main control panel. Boom! Sparks erupted, and the lights flickered as the ship's systems shut down. Mark turned to Buddy and Max. Run! They charged forward, knocking guards aside as alarms screamed through the ship. Zeller roared in anger. Stop them! Mark sprinted down the hallway, his heart pounding. They had crippled the ship's systems. Now they just had to escape before it was too late. Alarms blared across the Zyric command ship. Red warning lights flashed, and the sound of boots stomping filled the air. Mark, Buddy, and Max raced down the corridor, dodging Zyric soldiers as they chased after them. Mark grinned as he ran. Well, I'd say that went well. Max growled. Buddy wagged his tail, excited by the chaos. Behind them, General Xaler's angry roar echoed through the halls. Do not let them escape. Mark turned a corner and pressed his stolen Zyric communicator, pulling up the ship's layout map. All right, we need a way out of here. His eyes scanned the screen. There, the hangar bay is close. We can steal a ship and get out before they catch us. Buddy barked in agreement. Max simply nodded. But before they could reach the hangar, a squad of Zyric soldiers blocked their path, weapons raised. One soldier sneered. You're trapped, human. Surrender. Mark sighed. Yeah, that's not happening. He quickly pressed a button on his wristband, activating the EMP pulse from before. The soldiers' weapons short-circuited, sparks flying as their energy rifles became useless metal sticks. Max didn't wait. He lunged forward, knocking the soldiers aside like toys. Buddy followed, his strong paws swiping them down with ease. Mark sprinted past the fallen Zyric. Nice work, boys. The hangar was just ahead, but Xaler wouldn't let them escape so easily. Face to face with Xaler. As they entered the hangar, Mark skidded to a stop. His heart pounded. Standing between them and the escaped ships was General Xaler himself. The Zyric warlord's red eyes burned with fury. His massive figure blocked the path, his armor gleaming under the hangar lights. Behind him, more Zyric reinforcements rushed in. Mark clenched his fists. You really don't give up, do you? Xaler smirked. You cannot win, human. You are outnumbered. Surrender. Mark glanced at Buddy and Max. You guys ready? Max growled. Buddy's tail flicked. Mark smirked. All right, let's do this. The final battle. Xaler charged forward, his claws glowing with blue energy. Max leaped to meet him, their massive bodies colliding with a loud boom. The force sent a shockwave through the hangar. Mark ducked as Zyric soldiers fired plasma bolts at him. He rolled behind a crate, then grabbed a stun grenade from his belt. Boom! The blast sent Zyric soldiers flying, giving Buddy an opening to pounce on them. He knocked one aside, then spun, slamming his tail into another. Xaler roared, throwing Max off him. The huge Zyric general turned to Mark, his eyes filled with rage. You are nothing compared to me, human, Xaler growled. You cannot stop the Zyric Empire. Mark wiped sweat from his brow. Yeah, watch me. He pressed a button on his wristband, activating the hangar's security override. Emergency protocol activated, all hangar doors opening. With a loud rumble, the massive hangar doors slid open, revealing the vastness of space. The sudden pressure pulled Zyric soldiers off their feet, sending them flying into the void. Mark grabbed onto a railing, holding on tight. Hold on, guys. Max dug his claws into the metal floor. Buddy wrapped his tail around a pillar, keeping himself steady. Xaler, however, stood firm, his powerful legs keeping him grounded. You think this will stop me? He growled. Mark grinned. No, but this will. He grabbed a plasma rifle from a fallen soldier, aimed at a fuel tank, and fired. Boom! The explosion rocked the hangar, sending flames roaring through the area. The force knocked Xaler off balance, just enough for Max to pounce on him again, slamming him into the ground. "Nice work, Max," Mark shouted. Now was their chance to escape. The final flight. Mark dashed to a nearby Xyric fighter ship, jumping into the pilot's seat. Come on, come on." He quickly pressed buttons, activating the engines. The ship hummed to life. Buddy and Max leaped inside, just as Xyric soldiers regained their footing and started firing at them. Mark grabbed the controls. Time to go. With a roar, the ship blasted out of the hangar, dodging laser fire as it soared into space. Behind them, the Xyric command ship burned, alarms still blaring. Mark laughed. "We did it." Buddy barked happily. Max let out a satisfied rumble. But the battle wasn't over yet. Xyric pursuit ships launched after them, their weapons glowing with deadly light. Mark gritted his teeth. "All right, guys. One last fight." They weren't safe yet, but they weren't going down without a fight. Mark gripped the controls tightly, his heart pounding as the Xyric pursuit ships closed in. The vast darkness of space stretched before them, but behind, the enemy wasn't giving up. Laser blasts streaked past, barely missing their stolen fighter ship. Buddy barked, watching the enemy ships from the co-pilot's seat. Max growled lowly, sensing the danger ahead. Mark took a deep breath. "All right, guys. We're almost free. Let's make this count." The Xyric warship, now heavily damaged, loomed in the distance. Fire and debris floated in space, but Sailor's forces still had enough strength to chase them down. A voice crackled through the communicator. "Surrender now, human. There is no escape." Mark rolled his eyes. "You guys never quit, do you?" He suddenly jerked the controls, sending their ship into a sharp barrel roll. The Xyric ships tried to follow, but Mark was too fast. "Let's see if they can handle this," he muttered. He punched a button, activating the afterburners. The ship lurched forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated into open space. The Xyric ships pursued, lasers firing wildly. A dangerous plan. "We need a way to lose them," Mark said, scanning the ship's sensors. Then his eyes landed on something. A massive asteroid field up ahead. A grin spread across his face. "Perfect," Max rumbled, tilting his head. Buddy let out a questioning bark. Mark smirked. "Trust me." He angled the ship toward the dense asteroid belt, weaving through the floating rocks and debris. The Xyric ships followed, but they struggled to match his movements. One enemy ship miscalculated and crashed into an asteroid, exploding in a fiery burst. "Oops," Mark said, pretending to sound sorry. "Guess they weren't ready for that." Buddy wagged his tail, clearly amused. Max simply focused on the incoming threats. More Xyric ships pushed through, determined to capture them. Mark's mind raced. They needed something bigger, something to take out the remaining ships. Then an idea hit him. Turning the tables, Mark checked the ship's sensor readings again. There it was, a massive frozen asteroid, bigger than a battleship, slowly drifting nearby. A dangerous idea formed in his mind. "All right, guys," he said. "We're going to play a little trick." He maneuvered their ship behind the giant asteroid, making sure the Xyric ships followed. Then, just as they came around the other side, Mark fired the ship's plasma cannons, not at the enemy, but at the asteroid itself. Boom! The blast shattered a chunk of the asteroid, sending huge debris flying toward the pursuing ships. The Xyric pilots tried to dodge, but they weren't fast enough. One ship spun out of control, slamming into another. Both exploded. A third ship, now badly damaged, struggled to keep up. Mark took aim and fired one last shot. The enemy fighter burst into flames, its remains scattering in space. The radar showed no more pursuers. Silence filled the cockpit. Then, Buddy let out a happy bark. Max rumbled approvingly. Mark grinned. "I told you guys we'd make it." The final transmission. With the Xyric fleet left behind, Mark finally had a moment to breathe. He activated the ship's long-range communicator. This is Mark to any human forces. We have escaped Zurich territory. Mission success. A few seconds later, a response crackled through. Mark, you're alive. We thought you were captured. Mark chuckled. Nah, just had a little adventure. He glanced at Buddy and Max. They had come a long way together. Send us coordinates, the voice continued. We'll bring you home. Mark smiled. On our way. A new beginning. As the stolen Zurich fighter sped toward human space, Mark looked at his two companions. They had started as enemies. Now, they were a team. A human, a strange alien wolf, and a massive beast that was once feared across the galaxy. Mark leaned back in his seat. So, what do you guys think about getting some real food when we land? Buddy's ears perked up. Max let out a deep, satisfied rumble. Mark laughed. Yeah, I thought so. The stars stretched before them, a new adventure waiting just beyond the horizon. They were finally going home. The end.